If you've moved to or you're looking to move to Australia recently, you could be confused in thinking that Australia hates you right now. I mean, maybe not exactly, but with cost of living pressures seemingly always in the news, and with state elections and even national elections coming up soon, migration seems to be a hot topic at the moment. So when I came across this video attempting to explain why living in Australia could be impossible, I thought I'd have to give it a go so that you could see from the perspective of a migrant that moved to Australia nearly 4 years ago. Well, actually more than 4 years ago now. I can apply for citizenship soon. Let's see how impossible it is.
2023, for only the third time in 40 years, Australia entered a per capita recession. The result? Australian wages declined to levels not seen since June 2011. Even with devastating bushfires, the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown, when polled, there was one thing that affected Australians more than anything else: the cost of living. Over the last few decades,
I think cost of living is a massive issue wherever you live across the world. And if you're watching this right now and you're thinking, well, my country doesn't have a cost of living issue, where is that? And also, so that I have a bit more perspective, could you let me know how bad cost of living is in your country and then compare it to this?
Australia has experienced one of the greatest housing booms the world has ever seen. Since 1973, Australian house prices have increased by 36 times across the capital cities, and Sydney is now the second most unaffordable place to live in the world. How and why did we end up here?
I do hear a lot about people that live in Sydney, especially seeing as how expensive it is to live there. I don't know how some people can afford to live in Sydney, to be honest. For perspective, I don't live in Sydney, I live in Brisbane, which is now, I think, the second most expensive Australian city, but nowhere near the levels of expensiveness for housing as Sydney at all.
This is the dark side of Australia. Australia is one of the most beautiful places in the entire world. Surrounded by oceans, filled with world-class beaches, cities, and parks, the country looks like a paradise. But if you want to live here, it's easier said than done. To buy the median home in Melbourne, a family needs to earn at least $170,000 per year. In Sydney, that number balloons to $260,000 per year. Compare this to the median household income in both cities of $100,000, and it becomes clear that home ownership is far out of reach for most Australians.
Thinking about those statistics though, just go back a bit. $100,000 for the median family. That is a really difficult amount to live on. I guess when you're talking about people that are earning amounts in that kind of wage bracket, I can really understand how Australia is a very difficult place to live.
Home ownership is far out of reach for most Australians. Now, some might argue that this is only a Sydney or Melbourne issue, but that's just not the case. Since 2020, house prices in Brisbane, Adelaide, and Perth have increased by over 50%, while wages only grew 12%. Home ownership is becoming less and less attainable for many Australians, especially young Australians.
Oh, it's rough. Yeah, we can't find anything really.
Young people have not had the luxury to benefit from skyrocketing home values and are constantly playing catch up. The result? Home ownership rates for people under 34 have declined nearly 25%. The craziest example of Australia's housing crisis was this home in Sydney. It was sold without a toilet, without power, and without a kitchen. But that didn't stop a bidding war and someone paying $3.5 million.
Who is paying $3.5 million for that? I mean, I appreciate that probably the land is worth that amount and someone really, really wants to live there, but that can't be the average person that needs to live or have a home.
But what if you just want to rent? Surely you can find a decent place to rent. Sadly, no. Median rents in Sydney exceed $3,000 per month, while Brisbane is not too far behind at $2,500. Historically, Australian rental rates increased at a reasonable amount per year. However, since 2020, annual rental rates have skyrocketed by over 8% per year. People are caught between a rock and a hard place, trying to pay 2024 rental prices with 2011 wages. And this would all be fine and dandy if people could find a place to live. But the demand for rental units is insatiable. Every rental unit application is met with dozens, if not hundreds, of competing applications. Viewings have lines wrapped around blocks, and at the end of the day, renters aren't fighting for anything beyond a place to live, a place to sleep, and a place to call home.
I 100 other people applied for my apartment and like did the interviews.
It was really difficult. We were on Facebook groups for a while because there's just so much competition.
I can believe that the competition is rife the further into cities that you want to live. I mean, that wasn't the lifestyle that I was looking for when I wanted to move to Australia. To be honest, I kind of think to myself, if you want that city lifestyle with a beach, that's a pretty niche kind of type of person that wants to live like that. Like if you want to live in Bondi, be so close to the city, have the world famous beach, you're going to pay a premium. You're going to have competition of people that want to live there, and it kind of seems like survival of the fittest or the richest. I wonder to what extent do people need to compromise a little bit. Hey, I'd love my Australian lifestyle if I could live with my family in the UK. That's the compromise that I made.
The dream of working hard to afford a comfortable life is slowly fading, and hardworking, honest Australians are left feeling hopeless. All of this begs the question, why is real estate out of control? The first culprit that many point to is immigration.
Well, this week the government say the migration system is broken and needs a massive overhaul.
From 2022 to 23, Australia welcomed nearly 740,000 people. To put things into perspective, that's more immigrants than any year in modern Australian history, and 200,000 more than pre-COVID levels. The impact of this huge spike in immigration is simple. More demand with the same housing supply equals higher prices.
And this is what a lot of people are claiming at the moment is the massive problem to do with why people can't find rentals, why housing is so expensive. And I guess those people that are earning on the 100,000 median average, they're the ones that are being hit really hard. Perhaps they're the ones that are making the most noise when calling out immigration.
Specifically, economists and analysts believe that immigration has primarily impacted rental housing. The bulk of immigrants to Australia are temporary visa holders, and 70% of them are renters. The impact hits hard in migrant-heavy suburbs. For example, Melbourne's southeast or Sydney's inner southwest saw 18% jumps in rents in the last year. In addition, immigrants are often willing to split their unit with more people to stretch their dollar, outcompeting locals. This has led to an increased yield on rental rates on real estate that had not been seen in Australia for decades. But what about housing? The argument that immigrants are a primary contributor to the increase in housing prices is quite weak. Australia's migration rate has actually decreased over the last decade and is in line with historical averages. However, over the preceding years and decades, there is one big difference. While immigration has continued to grow with the population, housing starts have declined.
The construction industry is fake.
There we go. That's the other end of the spectrum. If you've got too many people coming in, it's going to drive the prices up. But by the same token, if you've not got enough of the commodity, in this case housing, that's also going to drive prices up as well. I don't think migrants are the reason why Australia isn't building enough houses. Perhaps they should bring in more carpenters.
Facing a catch-22 with the cost of building a new home rising again.
In 2023, 170,000 dwellings were completed, the lowest amount in a decade. At the same time, Australia saw the biggest spikes in immigration in a generation. So what gives? Since 1966, the number of homes being built relative to the population of Australia has been declining. Specifically, in the year 2000, building rates fell off a cliff, creating a significant supply shortage whose impact can still be felt today.
Now, if this video hasn't put you off wanting to move to Australia, then you might want to speak to the sponsors of our video, True Blue Migration Services, who together over the last 4 years, we've been able to help thousands of people in deciding, is moving to Australia the best option for you? So if one of the major driving forces is the cost of living where you live is even worse than Australia, then for the cost of just some of your time in uploading your CV or resume, you can find out for free whether you're entitled to a visa to move to Australia. And when you do that and try out their services, did I mention it's for free, you can find out whether you're a good fit, whether they can provide what it is that they need for you, and if you do decide to go with them, you can save an additional $200 off the cost of your visa. So apart from Stephen Miles seeming to throw all of the tax dollars at his chance of getting re-elected, I don't know any other people that are going to save you money moving to Australia at this time. Check them out on their website, trueblueimmigration.com. All the details are in the description down below. And when you do finally get here, ping us a message on Instagram, share your success story, because that is one of the main motivations why I keep making these weird little videos. Back to the other weird little video.
One of the main culprits for Australia's decline in housing starts is culture. Australia is a very suburban environment where communities and citizens have opted for urban sprawl over densification. For example, Sydney and Melbourne have about 2,000 people per square kilometer. Compare this to 6,000 in London, 4,400 in Munich, and 3,600 in Amsterdam. It is a shocking difference. When compared to other major Western cities, Australian cities are some of the least densely populated in the world. Many Australians believe that a suburban environment is ideal for raising families and safe communities. Thankfully,
I'd agree with that. It's one of the main reasons why I wanted to live in Australia over living in the UK, just having not necessarily less people. I mean, I live now in a city larger than any place I ever lived in the UK, but just having less people living on top of you seems to be a better way to raise
has
kids.
a ton of land that is mostly unpopulated. Theoretically, they can continue to build outward and maintain sprawl. Sydney alone could add 280,000 homes in its greenfield growth areas. But sadly, this would work in theory, but Australia has a major NIMBY problem. Even though Australia is going through an extreme housing crisis, March 2024 saw the lowest number of detached home approvals since 2012. These aren't high-rise condos, these are detached, single-family suburban homes. Strong community advocacy.
I noticed that quite a lot in northern Brisbane where I live. You see on local Facebook groups lots of people arguing about new housing developments that are going in. Some of it's about the size of the homes. We are seeing a lot of tendency for houses to be getting smaller, and I guess people are talking about that. But why would that affect you if you've already got a home and your house is larger anyway? But it's purely the fact that they don't want other people to live near them and kind of, I guess, backlog all of the services that they've got. It seems like they're quite resistant to having new people moving in their area. Anytime a new housing development goes in, another level of moaning and complaining. I wonder how many of these people are also the same that are moaning about immigration.
And government red tape lead to extremely long approval times for housing developments. For example, to receive an approval for a single home development in New South Wales, it takes 111 days on average. In Liverpool, that jumps to 288 days. Compare this to Texas, where it generally takes less than a week. These long wait times have made it impossible for the government to achieve home building targets. Specifically, Australia is on track to build 40% less homes than needed to meet the government's affordable housing targets. The low rate of approvals for housing has created an artificial land scarcity, which in turn has driven up the price of land. Since 2020, home values have risen at 3 times the rate of apartments. With land becoming such a scarce resource, it further challenges developments, as it becomes increasingly expensive to acquire and develop land economically. But this is almost entirely by design, as scarce land benefits homeowners. This has had a tremendous impact on young people in particular. Remember, home ownership rates for young people have dropped by 25%, compared to only 8% for the general population. Okay, we can all agree that immigration and low development rates are worsening Australia's housing crisis, but there is another critical factor at play: tax incentives. During the 1930s, Australia had a major housing shortage and wanted to encourage investment in rental properties. To encourage this, the country introduced negative gearing. Negative gearing allows an investor to offset the losses on a rental property against their personal income. For example, if you make $100,000 per year and lost $10,000 on your rental property, you can deduct the $10,000 off your personal income tax. This idea is pretty novel. In fact, out of the entire OECD, only New Zealand and Japan have these policies. During the 1980s, the government tried to change negative gearing rules, imposing restrictions on deductions that can be claimed, similar to the United Kingdom. But this was met with significant backlash, and negative gearing was returned to its original form. As the old adage goes, you can
lots
give,
of people with
but
investment
you can never
properties
take.
gonna lose
At the same
out.
time, in the 1980s, the government removed interest rate controls, which made it meaningfully cheaper for Australians to use debt to buy homes. This made negative gearing even more attractive and allowed people to leverage debt to execute the strategy. Now, this alone isn't enough to put Australia over the edge. Not only can you leverage negative gearing, but you can also hold real estate investments in your retirement account, known as a super. For those who don't know, a super is similar to an IRA. Like an IRA, a super has meaningful tax benefits, and when buying real estate, rental income taxes are reduced.
Even one of the things that I do is I salary sacrifice part of my earnings into my superannuation because it's cheaper on tax. It seems like tax is the main reason why people are looking to buy investment properties. And if there's more people looking for investment properties, then that's also going to raise the price, I guess.
15% instead of your marginal rate. Unlike the US, where buying real estate through an IRA is a huge pain and costly, in Australia, it's extremely easy and often encouraged. But that isn't all. There's more. In 1999, the Australian government reduced capital gains on real estate sales by 50%. And if you are holding your property in a super, you're effectively only paying a 10% tax. There is almost no country on earth that has such a favorable tax regime. This tax regime has been criticized heavily. The argument against it is that it materially benefits landowners and older Australians. And frankly, the argument is quite sound.
It does sound quite sound. How can people not understand that if it makes it easier for older people who already have lots of the houses just to buy more houses so that they can stick them in their super or use them for investments when they retire, it kind of makes it feel like it's creating a bubble that's going to burst. But then if they keep building fewer and fewer houses, then I'm not sure when the bubble is going to burst.
These tax policies have encouraged speculation in real estate and are costing taxpayers nearly $8 billion per year. Some might argue that this is overblown, but when 50 to 80% of all investment properties are negatively geared, there is a problem. A system that encourages speculation on income-losing properties is highly flawed and very unique. But this has created another challenge. Australia has made it so good to invest in non-productive assets like real estate that no one bothers to invest in anything else. Australia's productivity growth has been slow.
It does almost seem that in Australia, it's almost like a game. Something that you want to get into is property investment, particularly with all of the TV shows. Like reality TV, generally I kind of think is crap unless it's Love Island. But there are so many reality TV shows in Australia that are to do with property investment and doing up properties, that I guess that it becomes the natural evolution that people just want to keep doing it because they have a tax system that allows them to do so.
Over the last few decades, the average annual labor productivity growth between 2010 and 2020 was only 1.1%, significantly lower than previous decades. A lot of this is due to the lack of innovation and growth in non-service and non-mining sectors in Australia. The best way to put in perspective how little Australia innovates is to look at its R&D spend as a percentage of GDP. In 2022, Australia spent 1.7% of GDP on R&D. When compared to other major nations, that is terrible.
And that is probably going to annoy a lot of Australians that are perhaps watching this, to say that their R&D is terrible and that nothing good ever is innovated from Australia. The country that brought us the Hills Hoist, goon in a bag, Wi-Fi, I don't know. Is that going to tug at the heartstrings a little bit?
The OECD average is 2.4%, and major countries like the US, Germany, and the United Kingdom are all far better than Australia. As a result, nominal GDP per capita and real GDP per capita have not increased over the last 10 years. Wages and job prospects are eroding while cost of living continues to rise. The loser? Hardworking Australians. Even when you compare business and income tax, it's clear that Australia is deciding that land ownership is the most important investment activity. Average income taxes charged in Australia are higher than all but 3 OECD countries, and corporate taxes are no different. Australia's corporate tax rate is 6.3% higher than the OECD average, and when comparing Australia's small business tax to even Canada's, Australia's is 2.5 times higher. Currently, Australia collects a disproportionate amount of government revenue from income taxes and corporate taxes, and a disproportionately low amount from real estate. As Charlie Munger famously said, "Show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome." Here you have it, a government that has incentivized speculation on housing while disincentivizing working hard and building productive businesses. The incentive to hoard land, the outcome, a terribly unfair economic system. I can already imagine the comments on this video, blaming political parties for the issues at hand. And that might be easy to blame any single government for the housing crisis in Australia. But in reality, this problem has persisted for decades. The Labour Party of Paul Keating saw a modest rise in housing prices, while concurrently seeing a rapid modernization and growth of the overall Australian economy. Overall, his tenure was mostly balanced. But then John Howard came in and saw the greatest rise in housing prices in modern Australian history. Under his tenure, housing more than doubled. Then, the Labour Party got 3 chances, but housing continued to grow, only slowing down because of the financial crisis. Following this was the coalition government. Tony Abbott, strike. Malcolm Turnbull, strike. Scott Morrison, strike. And housing still out of control. Now, with
I guess Anthony Albanese is the only one really that's kind of bucking the Labour trend, because looking at this graph, it mainly seems to be the LNP that keeps creating problems.
We finished the decade with a massive increase in housing prices. If you bought a home in 1992 for
how much is this going to be worth now?
Today, it would be worth $2.4 million. And if you were born after 1992, you probably don't own a home and might never. The conclusion is simple. This is beyond political parties. Australia's housing crisis runs deep. It is something that cannot be solved by jumping from one bandwagon to the next. What will it require? Incentivizing business investment, lowering income taxes for hardworking Australians, abolishing negative gearing,
that'd help,
lowering capital gains incentives, removing red tape to encourage developments, and educated Australians who can keep politicians honest. You are the solution, and your tool is policy. Good luck. Subscribe to 2 and 20.
Well, I'll tell you what, not only does that video kind of make me a little bit inspired when I am able to vote to choose the correct political alliances, mainly to help my own kids. How are they going to be able to afford a house, particularly if you're looking at those 1992 statistics to today? Maybe I should start my own property investment portfolio. But after watching that video, it does make me think to myself, is Australia really the glory country that everyone makes it out to be? I mean, I sold my house in the UK, which was a 3-bedroom semi-detached, 84 square meters inside on about 290 square meters of land, and then traded up for a 5-bedroom house in North Brisbane with a pool. I think for a lot of migrants wanting to move here, cost of living isn't making it any easier for anyone. But I think one of the main lessons that I've learned from this video is the longer you leave things, the potentially more and more difficult it might be in the future. I really do feel sorry for people that live in any country that can't afford the cost of living of where they live. But as a skilled migrant that moved here, and with the skills shortages we still have in Australia, I still do think in the long term, the solution is to let more skilled people in rather than to keeping them out. After all, how are we going to build all of these houses that we need if we don't have the people to build them? Thanks for watching. If there are any more videos that you'd like me to see that are about moving to Australia or the problems with migration, then let me know. Put them in the comments down below. And let me know what you think. Is this video right? Is it wrong? What is the solution to the Australian housing crisis and the cost of living? And if you want to see more of my sad little opinions to other videos, then why not watch this one? See you next time.